So I just wanted to welcome you all again to our How Clinics Community and Health and Wellness Night here on September 27th. Dr. Lee is going to be our presenter today for energy balance and metabolism. So just want to welcome Dr. Lee, and I'll let you take the stage here for your webinar for tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Samantha, and welcome everybody to another session. So I really enjoy doing these sessions just because it's transfer of knowledge. It's the stuff we learn in medicine, especially this topic alone. This is a lot of our basic science, and finally I get to kind of present it to everybody here. And so obviously, when it comes to energy and metabolism, um, it's one of those things where if you attempt to lose weight, it always pops up about, calories and burning fat or burning carbohydrates, way we eat, increase your metabolism, how metabolism is slow if I don't lose weight. And so hopefully by the end of this session, you'll appreciate kind of how the body works. And obviously there's a natural flow of things. And one of the key concepts is homeostasis. And homeostasis is basically a state where everything's in balance in our body, where energy, the breakdown of food to consumption, all that works to keep us alive, really, right? And so when things are imbalanced, meaning that the body will utilize the least amount of energy to keep us alive, right? And so keep that in mind, and hopefully you'll appreciate that by the end of the day. So the objectives today are quite a lot, because there's a lot of little topics in energy metabolism. And so we're going to talk about why energy metabolism is important. And so we're going to first then, of course, have to talk about the sources of energy, where we get our source of energy from. And then we have to dive a little deeper, more microscopic. This is to the biochemistry part, which is the units of energy and how the body utilizes the energy from a day-to-day perspective. And you can't talk about energy metabolism without talking on the cellular level, and beyond that in the organelles within the cell, in particular the mitochondria. And some of you guys might have heard of the mitochondria theory as well, in terms of health and wellness, and that's true to a good degree. And I do believe that plays a role. And we're going to talk about the expenditures of our energy, right? So our body expenditure, talking about basal metabolic rate, what's the difference between that and resting metabolic rate, or energy expenditure with exercise and when we eat food and whatnot. And more importantly, the determinants of energy expenditure. How do we burn out calories per se? What is the predominant source of energy expenditure? Should you focus on fasting? Should you focus more on increasing lean muscle mass, etc.? All these things, right? Which where you should go. And for those that are in our program, most of our patients know that we modify the individual's kind of plan as we go along, because we know that you lose a lot of weight in the beginning and it gets harder, and you usually go between 2 to 3 plateaus in a year with us. And so we change it up a little bit, and hopefully this will enlighten you on the reasons why we do that. And we're going to talk about the physiological responses or changes to so with our metabolism as we age and with weight loss. And so what's the natural effect of that, and why all of a sudden we wake up one morning, oh my God, I'm like 10 pounds heavier, right? And so it's not that fast. Obviously, it slowly creeps up on us. And we're going to talk more about weight loss plateau and why that happens. And we're going to finish up with some metabolic myths overall. And so talking about, things that we hear a lot and on social media too as well, and hopefully to shed some insight into all that. Okay. And so what is energy, and why is energy and metabolism important? Well, first of all, everything needs energy. So if you think about a combustion engine, or even now a EV, electric vehicle engine, if there's no battery source, no energy, so everything shuts down. Same thing with us. We need energy to keep our locomotion in our body going. And so this is a very complex process overall, and it involves hundreds and hundreds and thousands of reactions during the day. And so with these reactions, it takes actually energy to put into the reaction, and also it produces waste, and that's why the body gets rid of all these carbon dioxide and water, we have excrements, etc., all that things as well. So the body is constantly creating, destroying and building, destroying and building. And the destruction part is what we call catabolism. So if we eat a meal, it has to be broken down into its constituents, into, for example, if you say eat a burger, so you get carbohydrates, you get fats, you get protein. So you got to break down into basically glucose, which is the most simple substrate for carbohydrates, the fats to free fatty acids, and then you have protein to amino acids. So it has to break all that down, right? So it takes amount of energy to actually do that. And so we call that the thermogenic effect of food. And then so as the body breaks this down, it utilizes these substrates to build other things in our body. So the body's always constantly turning over cells, turning over the linings in our body. More proteins are being utilized and more needs to be made. So the process of building up is called anabolism. And so all these are occurring simultaneously, and there is obviously a good harmony and homeostasis between this, or else if there's too much catabolism, what happens is we shrink. And so we see this in certain conditions where the catabolic state are high, so people lose weight. For example, cancer, there's a high catabolic rate, and so we lose muscle mass, fat, and so on. And the opposite is anabolism. It happens obviously when there's overabundance of nutrients and calories. We start to put on weight too as well, right? So that happens throughout. And so the process of energy metabolism is vital, and it's a constant process. And so we absolutely need this. And so when you have a disruption in one process, it's a chain reaction to other processes going on. So for example, you have insulin resistance, it leads to other organ failures over time, etc. So what would be the ideal scenario, in a situation where you want to lose weight? So the ideal scenario is that you want to actually burn fat or lose fat, but build muscle. Why is that the case? Well, one is that, we know that health, that status of health is related to fat body percentage. And we know that when we start to lose weight, we'll lose fat for sure, we'll lose a bit of water, but simultaneously we lose a bit of muscle, often because when we start to lose weight, we cut our calories down, we have a bit of a calorie deficit. So things move proportionally, meaning that your percentage of body fat will be relatively the same even though you're at a lower weight. So in terms of BMI, your numbers might go down, and it definitely is a marker of health. But also, if you look at a different perspective, a marker of health is also fat percentage. You're still at risk to a certain degree as well. But overall, there's an improvement. So the ideal situation for us is to actually build muscle, or at least maintain your muscle as much as possible, and burn the fat. And that's where you look more lean. So for individuals, for example, bodybuilders and whatnot, you see these nice, beautiful six-pack abs. These guys have to build their actually fat percentage down, bring their fat percentage down to about 13, 10%, or even lower. When those individuals do a photo shoot, they're down to like 6 to 8%, and they can't sustain this for very long, like 10 to 12%. What typically happens is they do a really hard diuretic, they do a really low carbohydrate for about a couple of days, and they do the photo shoot, and they go bounce right back up to kind of, they actually sometimes gain 10 to 15 pounds. And this happens a lot in athletes, right? Because athletes, typically what happens is that they're more fit, they're more active, burn a lot of calories during their season, and then after the season they let loose, but they eat the same amount of food. Their behaviors are the same, right? And so they gain a lot of weight too as well. And we see a lot of athletes who retire gain a lot of weight too as well. So this is kind of that balance of energy perspective. And so the ideal situation, if you want to lose weight, is you want to burn fat, you want to maintain your muscle, or at least build muscle as well. So in order to understand what happens in metabolism energy, we got to think about a food that goes through our digestive system, or we call it ileum canal. So in terms of food, when you eat a burger, let's say you start chewing it down. So there's the first process. It's in our mouth. Okay, we have mechanical breakdown of the food through chewing, and there's saliva that breaks down. So we have a chemical breakdown. So in your mouth, you have both mechanical and chemical breakdown, right? And so one of the question is, how long do you chew for, right? Most of us actually don't chew that long. So if you ever ate a cracker, it might taste a little salty or no flavor, for example, a soda cracker. But if you actually chew a soda cracker long enough to break it down into paste and stuff like that, what you'll find is that it starts to taste sweet over time. And that's because the glucose, the starch is being broken down further and further into actually into glucose, and that gets absorbed into our mouth and our mucosa, and we actually can taste that too as well. And so they say so the food starts in our mouth. We get a mechanical breakdown of the food with chemical breakdown, and so we swallow that. It goes into our esophagus and down into our stomach. And this is where the bulk of the breakdown of food occurs, right? And so the goal of the stomach is to break it down further. So there's pepsin in our stomach, which breaks down protein. There's like sulfuric acid, which breaks down tenderizes the food and meat as well. And there's mechanical turning of the stomach lining and wall, and so that we get this kind of further mechanical and chemical breakdown. And foods can stay in there for a long time, and depending on the food too as well. So if you ever ate a large meal of protein and fat, they're going to stay much longer in your stomach than, for example, a piece of fruit or carbohydrates. And so, for example, if you eat a piece of fruit, within 30 minutes, often it will have left your stomach already. If you eat complex carbohydrates, it's about 1.5 hours, 2 hours. If you eat protein, it's 3 hours or more as well. And that's why we feel more full with protein, is that it takes a lot longer to break down. It stays in our stomach a lot longer before it leaves the stomach and into the intestines, right? So it leaves the stomach in a paste, like, and so that's what we call chyme. And then it goes into the small intestine. And this is where the absorption of food further occur. And in this process, in the small intestine, in certain parts, there's 3 parts to it. So certain parts will be absorption for minerals, vitamin B12, amino acids, fats, and further sugar. So there's further chemical breakdown of the food into further smaller substrates, and that gets reabsorbed into a system. And finally, once it goes through that in the small intestine, you see here, once it finishes the small intestine, it goes into a large intestine, and that's where the final processing of food occurs. And so further nutrients are breaking down or absorbed there. A lot of the water is extracted, and you're left, obviously, with the leftover, the excrement that we expel out. And so that's kind of the entire journey of food when we start to chew it down to our body. And this process can take up to a whole day, for depending on the food you're eating too as well. So if you chew better, obviously it's going to be easier for the body to break down the food. And then there's studies have shown that people who chew 20 minutes or more with their food, they actually, burn more calories. Two, they notice that their hunger, their satiety cue, satiety means your fullness cue, they're able to recognize it, and they tend not to overeat. And overall, these individuals have a lower calorie consumption. So that's our journey food. Now, I went through this too already. And so let's go and talk about the units of energy. So you have to understand, and we know, for the most part, like the calories in food. And so it's a law actually in Canada and in most countries that they actually have to put the calories in the food. But obviously the manufacturers are very smart. They manipulate it quite a lot. They combine a lot of things and separate a lot of things to create a lower number of calories. And so be very careful. And there's a lot of manipulation within the marketing. So we know what a calorie is. So basically, the scientific definition of a calorie is the amount of energy needed to increase 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. And that's basically what it is, right? And so you might have a kilocalorie. And so basically, the calorie we talk about is 1 calorie is a capital C, and which is equal to 1 kilocalorie, which is 100,000 small calories. Okay, so that's confusing, but basically that's where the calories come from. So now let's move to kind of the macronutrients. This might be more interesting. Is, well, how much calories are in protein, carbohydrates, and fat, and alcohol as well, right? And so if you talk about 1 gram of carbohydrates, there's 4 calories, right? So that's glucose per se, right? And 1 gram of protein is 4 calories, and protein is broken down to amino acid. And 1 gram of fat is 9 calories, which is broken down to fatty acids. So you can see here, 1 gram of fat has 2.5 times the calorie, so almost 2.5 times the calorie of protein and carbohydrates. What about alcohol? Alcohol, we all enjoy that from time to time. It's 7 calories and per gram. So kind of in between the two. Obviously, when we have alcohol, we tend to have food with it, so the calories do add up very quickly. So the way the body uses these substrates of glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids is through cellular metabolism. And it's hard for me to not talk about cellular metabolism when it talks about units of energy. And so the unit or the currency of how energy is how the energy is used is through the source of ATP. For example, in our combustion engine, we use gasoline to move the motor part and provide energy. In our cells, which is the basic structural unit per se, we use what called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And so when we create adenosine triphosphate, it's an anabolic process, right? So we're creating this molecule. The energy is stored in the bonds of the phosphate. And when that's broken, that's released into energy. And so the next slide we're going to talk about is going to talk about cellular respiration. Cellular respiration basically is the production of energy. And so here we have basically a cell here. And so basically, the whole big circle is the cell, and the small one is what we call the mitochondria. And so what we can have here is this. There are three main cycles or processes that create what we call these ATP or adenosine triphosphate. And so one is called the glycolysis, the other is called the Krebs cycle, and the last one is called the electron transport chain. And that's the most important one. And you can see how much the amount of energy is produced in each of the cycles here. And so this particular sequence of cycle, the 38 ATPs adenosine triphosphate is made, is from glucose. So when we talk about fat, they have their own cycle, meaning that they enter these three cycles in a different place. And we have amino acids, which also enter in different places as well. And I'll give you a demonstration of those in terms of the diagram. And so, for example, if you eat some glucose, you eat some starch, the starch will break into glucose, and each glucose molecule will go through what we call like glycolysis in the cell cytoplasm, and it's breaking down to what we call pyruvate or pyruvic acid that gets shunted into the mitochondria, and it goes into what we call a Krebs cycle or a citric acid cycle. And then that pumps down a few other molecules, particularly the NADH and FADH, and those are energy stores. And what they go through what we call the electron transport chain, and that creates the most ATP. So in one molecule of glucose, you're producing about 38 ATPs, right? And so that's kind of the bottom line. And so let's move to other substrates. So we talk about protein. So we have here, so this is our Krebs cycle or a citric acid cycle. So that's the middle part here. So this is just broken down into more different substrates. And see here, these boxes here are different amino acids. And so these amino acids are broken down for energy. And so when you don't have enough calories in your diet, you will start to break down protein for energy. You need glucose and all that kind of stuff, right? And so this is what happens. This is where the catabolic process of muscle wasting, muscle mass loss occurs as well. The other thing is when glycogen, which is the main storage of glucose in our body, it's also stored in our muscle. And so the body will utilize that too as well. And then your muscle mass decreases as well. But when we break down amino acids, they come into different parts of the Krebs cycle. And again, once they go through the Krebs cycle, they will go through the last part of the energy production factory, which is the electron transport chain. This diagram here is the free fatty acids. So the free fatty acids taken into the cell, obviously, is breaking down to lipid droplets, and palmitic acid is kind of the last little fat, and that goes into the acetylcholine. And here again, it starts at a tricyclic or the Krebs cycle, and again goes into finally the electron transport chain. So you can imagine, because the fat has more energy store program, theoretically is going to make more ATP, and that's true, right? So when you compare the ratio of 1 unit, for example, of 1 gram of glucose per se and 1 gram of fat, you can produce about 2.25 to 2.4 more ATP than you will with in fat versus glucose. And so you have to burn, so you have a lot of fat, you have to burn that much more calories in order to lose the fat. So that's why it's important to monitor your fat intake, especially when you really want to trim up and to look more lean. So the energy balance in the body is regulated by hormones, and it's influenced by external stimuli. And so if you did talk, if you did attend our session on origins of obesity, we talked about ghrelin, we talked about leptin. Those are some of the main hormones that affect the hypothalamus in terms of energy. Other hormones, insulin will affect your metabolism, cortisol, thyroid as well will affect it. So these are the hormones that affect, and obviously the external stimuli, meaning that, our social environment, our desires with food, our cravings also affect that simultaneously. So energy input comes from the food that we eat, both solids and liquids. And keep in mind, there's lots of hidden calories that we're not aware of too as well. Particularly hidden calories are in sauces or also in dense packed food too as well. And so a lot of times, people say I don't eat a lot of food, but sometimes the food contains hidden calories they're not aware of overall. And so the body then wants to extract these energy, and a lot of times, we think about the amount of food comes in, the amount of energy comes out, and so energy in is equivalent to energy output, and that's not true. So, for example, if you were to eat an apple, and if I was to eat an apple, it does not mean that, let's say the apple is 80 calories typically, right? And so let's say I eat an apple, I might extract only maybe 60 calories. You might extract the whole 70 calories, right? And that's dependent a lot on our digestive system, our gut microbiome too as well, right? And the counter as well to that is that once we have extracted calories, your activity may burn more calories or less calories than myself. It depends on it's dependent on your weight, it's dependent on your lean muscle mass, and it's dependent on your intensity too as well. And so it's not always a 1-to-1 ratio of energy in equals energy out, right? But the thing is that to look at the global trends of what we're doing, to see what you're doing is actually moving your needle in the right direction overall.
Can I ask a question there
Yes.
quickly, Dr. Lee?
Yep.
Just in regards to monitoring energy in and energy out, just to kind of put out there that is something that can be tested,
Yeah,
correct?
so you can theoretically test to a degree, and so something that we have in our office called the indirect calometric testing. And so what indirect calometric testing is that we actually measure how much oxygen you use. So there's indirect measurement, and so the direct measurement testing, calometric testing, which is the gold standard, is a body pod. So anybody heard of the body pod? So you go in a body pod, they measure how much heat you generate, they take the heat change and they convert it into how your BMR may be. And so we do indirect calometric testing in that sense. from a food perspective, I mean, it's not a science. We see that this is how many calories. It's an estimation. Obviously, there's a variability, but you can measure to a very close degree your food consumption and the calories. There's apps nowadays that take a snapshot of your plate of food and gives you kind of a rough estimation of calories based on what they recognize. And these are estimates. That's why it's not a science. When we say, hey, you know what, my numbers are major deficit and it's not moving in the right direction, right? And so you just really have to look at the food that you're eating and the amount of activity you're expending as well, right? And especially when it comes to level activity, it's really difficult to pinpoint how much energy you're expending with your level activity. And I'll show you towards the end how much energy we expend doing activities. It is mind blowing how little it actually how little calories we actually burn. That's why I focus on more on nutrition and less on the exercise when it comes to weight loss. But in order for weight loss to occur, you have to have negative energy balance. I can't stress that enough. So if you talk to a lot of dietitians, they tell you, calories doesn't matter, or, don't count your calories. That's not true. And the reason why they say that to you is they don't want you to be fixated on the numbers. And I agree with that. You shouldn't be fixated on calories, but you should be aware of what you're putting in your mouth. Okay. So you should be aware of how calorie dense certain foods are versus other. Okay. You got to be aware of how much you're eating overall. Recall bias, meaning that when I ask individuals, hey, what did you eat 2 days ago? They can't remember. So if you can't remember, you don't record, then you're not going to know how much calories consumed. And that's why when we ask people to record all the food they eat. It's like, oh, okay. And what happens is they naturally start to lose weight because they actually are keeping track of the amount of food they were actually eating, right? And so for weight loss to occur, you definitely need to have a negative energy balance overall. So I'm going to talk about now about energy expenditure and where that comes from. So we know that, for energy input, we got to eat the food, obviously, and how much food you eat will dictate how much calories overall. Also, how much food you eat will also determine how much calories you burn. So you need to have energy in or invested to break down the food, right? So we call that the thermogenic effect of food. And the way it works is that protein needs the most energy to be broken down, followed by fat, and followed by carbohydrates. Sorry, followed by carbohydrates and followed by fats. Okay, so if you eat a lot of fat, it's high in calories, right? But also the thermogenic effect of food, TEF, is also low. So you're at a disadvantage, right? And so if you eat a higher protein, your BMR tends to be a little higher. If you have complex carbohydrate, it tends to be a little higher than simplified carbohydrates, for example, white bread versus beans and lentils, legumes as well. And so your food choices do matter significantly. And so the food you eat matters in terms of how much energy we need to break down. But the bulk of your energy usage for the day is through your basal metabolic rate or resting metabolic rate. Okay. And so if you can see here, this nice, beautiful pie chart we have here, it breaks down into multiple categories. Your basal resting metabolic rate, you have your physical activity, we're all aware of, your thermogenic effect of food. So thermogenic effect of food is between 8 and 10%. Now, these are rough estimates, okay? Your basal metabolic rate, typically we quote about 60%, and then your physical activity is 32%. Now you say physical activity, is that exercise? Is that just walking? That's everything you're doing in a day. So you might be only exercising for 30 minutes a day, but you're moving, you're fidgeting, you're walking, you're pacing, all these things, you go on the stairs and stuff. So that includes everything. Okay. But obviously we don't consider fidgeting, we don't consider walking, we don't consider walking upstairs and cooking and cleaning and stuff like that, all these motions we're doing to be exercise, right? But And that's why I say when it comes to exercise alone, like you go for a jog, you go for a bike ride, you go for a swim, it only counts for maybe about 10% of actually weight loss, how much it contributes to actually your total weight loss. But it does have a lot of other benefits, such as behavioral change, improving cardiovascular fitness, the euphoria that we get with it, the release of endorphins, stress reliever, all these other benefits with exercise. So it is extremely important. When it comes to pure weight loss in the beginning, typically it's not as important as nutrition. And so your resting metabolic rate, it accounts for about 60 cents. There's a difference between resting metabolic rate and basal metabolic rate. So resting metabolic rate includes a little bit of your fidgeting around, you're sitting, you're moving a little bit. That's your resting metabolic rate. Basal metabolic rate basically is if I just sit still for 24 hours, how much energy does it take to keep me alive? That's basal metabolic rate, right? So it's very similar. But we typically clump it together into RMR, which is the resting metabolic rate. So keep in mind that your total daily expenditure is the accumulation of your resting metabolic rate, which accounts for the most, your physical activity, and your thermal effect or thermogenic effect of food. The key determinant of the resting metabolic rate is actually your lean muscle mass. So the more muscle mass you have, the higher your RMR is. So you think about an individual who is very large, right? They actually have a lot of muscle mass too as well. But as they start to lose weight, that decreases as well, right? So look at bodybuilders too as well. They're consuming 10,000 calories. Football players will consume sometimes 10,000 calories. I can't imagine. It was Michael Phelps. He consumes about 9 to 13,000 calories a day. It's phenomenal, but he's swimming like 5-6 hours a day. He's got a lot of muscle mass. He's very lean, so he's got a high BMR, and so his BMR is probably 5,000 calories per day, right? And he's a tall gentleman too as well. So your height, your age, your sex, which often determines a lean muscle mass, will affect your basal metabolic rate too as well. So in weight loss in general, typically trying to maintain your lean muscle mass or building lean muscle mass is very good to keeping a higher resting metabolic rate. But keep in mind that your muscle mass is the most determined part of your RMR, and RMR is the largest portion of energy expenditure. So your total daily energy expenditure, is equal to your resting metabolic rate plus your energy of physical activity plus the thermogenic effect of food. So that's the equation. So in terms of energy balance, right, if you have a surplus, if you have a deficit, so if you have energy surplus, the body will conserve that energy excess into obviously accumulation of fat. And that's just, this is a survival mechanism, an evolutionary process that the body does. As you have an energy deficit, then you start to lose weight depending on how you do it, depending on what foods you eat. For example, if you eat low carbohydrates, the body will first of all get rid of your glycogen in the body, right? So the majority of the glycogen is in your muscles, about 2 to 3 kilograms, depending on your size, male and female, are stored in our muscle system, our muscles in our body, and about 700 to maybe 800-900, depending on your size, again, is stored in our liver, right? And so the body will start to break all these down if you're doing a ketogenic diet, very low carb, and then it will start to utilize more and more of the fat. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that the energy process of breaking down these substrates of carbohydrates and protein and fat occur in silos. It's not just like, okay, you know what, we're going to switch to carbohydrate breakdown, we're going to switch to fat breakdown, we're going to switch to protein breakdown. That doesn't work that way. All these energy expenditure systems are working simultaneously. It's basically what's the predominant. If you're eating a high carbohydrate food, then your predominant breakdown is going to be, or energy source of breakdown is going to be obviously carbohydrates and glucose. If you're doing a very low carbohydrates, the body's going to go more so to fats and protein if you're not eating enough protein, right? Even if you are actually eating enough protein, you still have some protein breakdown too as well, right? So that still occurs. And so if you're eating predominantly fat, and then obviously then that will be the permanent breakdown. That's why you have high ketones in your body. And so ketones basically are a measure of fat breakdown. So basically your energy balance is equal to your energy consumption minus your total daily expenditure. So if it is a deficit and negative, then you're going to lose weight over time. If it's a surplus, and then obviously you're going to gain weight over time. So what happens as we start to change this equation? Like I said, the body likes homeostasis. It will try to keep you at this highest weight. And unfortunately, what happens is as you start to lose weight, the body will start to adapt to bring the balance back. Energy input equals energy output, right? And so that's why we hit the plateau. So what happens is your basal metabolic rate as you lose muscle mass starts to go down, right? And so then simultaneously your RMR will start to decrease over time too as well. Not only that, the studies shown that the usage of energy becomes more efficient, meaning that, for example, if it takes you 10 calories to do a curl, bicep curl, it might take you only 8 calories when you lose a substantial amount of weight too as well. Now, one of the important things is that people who go super low, no carbohydrates, right? And they expect really good fat loss. Now, the problem with that is that we actually need a little bit of carbohydrates, i.e. glucose, to actually burn fat. And the reason for that is that the low carbohydrates can affect our thyroid function, right? And so we know that when people do low carbohydrates, what happens is their thyroid function starts to decrease, right? So it's important because it will affect metabolism in general. Carbohydrates will also prevent protein breakdown indirectly and promote fat metabolism through leptin too as well. Carbohydrates also affects the cortisol balance, which will also affect our fat distribution and fat breakdown. So it's can be done, but the body will somehow produce glucose. So that means it will break down basically other substrates to create glucose, called gluconeogenesis, right? And so the plateau that we see multiple times in the year in our weight management program relates to just the efficiency of our energy, the balance and hemostasis. And so if you plateau for a while, that just tells you that your energy input is equal to your energy output. And so you have to disrupt that homeostasis somehow. And the body doesn't like to move, doesn't like to do things extra because it burns calories. The goal of the body is to conserve energy, just like our own motivation. Sometimes we don't like to do things, we like to be still because it takes a lot more effort overall. And so what are some of the determinants of energy expenditure over time? And so if after the age of 30, we start to lose our BMR by 1% per year, and often that is related to loss of muscle mass of roughly 1% per year as well, right after the age of 30. Our peak resting metabolic rate is at about 2 p.m., and that's where a lot of the functions occur. And so after that, your energy expenditure comes down towards and lowest, obviously, when you're not moving whatsoever. As I mentioned earlier, your BMR and RMR correlates best with muscle mass. And we all know about brown fat versus white fat. Babies, infants, children has a lot more brown fat versus white fat. And this is basically what keeps them really warm over time. And as we get older, we have obviously more white fat. Having said that, though, you can actually increase your brown fat, right? And so the brown fat basically has more what we call mitochondria. And mitochondria is what creates that brownness through the fat under the microscope. And so, and remember, the mitochondria is where the majority of energy production occurs. Hence, more mitochondria, more factors produce energy. So you burn more energy. So brown fat burns more energy than white fat. And you can induce more brown fat by, for example, taking more cold showers, wearing less clothes, and basically increasing the body temperature itself. So there are some studies that say that can be done, but most of us have virtually zero brown fat as an adult. Okay, it's more of a child, infant, baby type of fat. Our gut flora plays a big portion into our energy metabolism and energy expenditure to it as well. So it plays in terms of our hunger and craving and how much food we eat. One of the most important thing, additionally, is sleep in general. Sleep will affect your metabolism significantly, typically through cortisol. And cortisol is a stress hormone. It's okay in short term, but in long term, with chronic sleep deprivation, it is a quite detrimental. So we put on fat, our metabolism tends to drop. Having said that, though, those who sleep less hours typically have a higher energy expenditure. So if you're staying up a little later, you're going to spend more energy. That's normal because you're moving a little more. But over time, um, the chronic sleep deprivation will change your hormones and lead to increased energy consumption typically, and that's why there's a disruption in the energy balance with chronic sleep deprivation. The proportion of macronutrients, as I mentioned earlier, eating more protein will increase the thermogenic effect of food versus fat versus carbohydrates. And finally, your hormones, your ghrelin, your leptin, your thyroid, your cortisol, all these and other hormones will also affect your energy expenditure as well. Disrupting the energy balance in general. So basically, you want to reduce your food consumption, and really what we're doing is just eating better food in general. So we want to minimize the refined food and we find the packaged and processed food, and then we want to increase your physical activity, so increase your energy expenditure. You want to consume foods maybe higher, has a higher thermogen effective food, and so basically eating complex carbohydrates versus more refined carbohydrates. For example, eating lentils and legumes versus eating just white rice, right? So it costs more energy to break that down than white rice. You want to increase your muscle mass. This is where physical activity comes in. That's where resistance training comes in too as well. And you want to balance your hormones. If there's a disruption in your thyroid function, disruption in your cortisol, there's adrenal fatigue. If you have poor sleep, which all affects your hormones, you want to correct that too as well. And then keep in mind, the calories we eat in does not always equal the calories out, meaning that how much we burn. So keep that in mind in terms of calorie expenditure. So here's a perfect example of basically eating better food, how we can lose weight. And so a lot of times in our clinic, we tell patients to eat actually more food to lose weight, right? Because one is that they have more energy, so they expend more energy, but at the same time, the thermogen effective food as well. But you have to monitor what kind of food you're eating, right? So a small classic as a Lay's classic bags. I love chips myself. I have a weakness for chips, right? And that small bag that we buy at the variety store is 240 calories, okay? On the bottom is a medium-sized potato. And so probably it's 3/4 size of your palm. My palm is pretty tiny. And so it's probably 3/4 size of my palm. And that's 142 calories. You can almost have two of the potatoes and have the same amount of calories. You see the difference between the quality food. And so we talk about what we call calorie dense food and nutrient dense food. And this is very important in terms of, energy metabolism and calories in, calories out, right? And so on the left hand side, I have nutrient dense food. And then on the right side, I have calorie dense food. And calorie dense foods basically is, per weight, there's how much calories, right? Whereas nutrient dense food, there's a good amount of calories, but we get other nutrients within it too as well, where we get a lot of food for very little calories. And that's really what it is. And so a lot of it, you can imagine it's related to your vegetables, your complex carbohydrates, such as legumes, quinoa, berries, you got your cruciferous vegetables, such as your broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts in the same categories. Avocado is also one of those. Sweet potato, seaweed, ground beef. It's tiny, it's lean ground beef typically, and your leafy vegetables. Calorie dense food. Here not as nutritious for you. Obviously, avocados on both sides. Okay, so you got to be careful. So even avocado is small, it is high in calorie. granola bars, a lot of us gravitate to for energy. And there's a reason why it's high in energy, right? Because it's a lot of things are packed together. You got fatty meats, fried food, pastries, cakes, candy, chips, sugary drinks, and milkshakes. And I'll put in there protein shakes too as well. You know, I mean, you can down a protein shake pretty easily, and a protein shake has about 130 to 140 calories, right? And so keep in mind of the food you eat, at least understand roughly how many calories are in each food. You don't need to know the exact number. I can ballpark a lot of foods that I eat myself. And so let's talk about activities for energy expenditure, right? So this is 30 minutes of exercise. On the left hand side, we have the activities, and if you're a different weight, you'll burn different amount of calories, right? You have to carry more weight, you need more energy to move it. And so if you're 125 pounds, you're 155 pounds, you're 185 pounds, those are three categories. So I'm about 130 in between, so close to 125. So if I'm doing weightlifting at 30 minutes, and I only burn 90 calories. That's basically, if you eat a bag of chips, we said it was 240 calories. So that's like, a lot of times we're hungry, you just grab a bag of chips. It seems so minimal, nominal. But you just outdid your 30 minutes of exercise, right? Even if you're 185 pounds, right? You have to actually basically work an hour if you eat one bag of chips in a day, right? So it's phenomenal. What about water aerobics? 120, 140, 168. What about regular aerobics? A little better. If you're 185 pounds, you're burning 231 calories. Most of us maybe are around 198. We burn, 155 pounds, you burn about 198 calories only, right? Stationary bike, a little more, 294 if you're 185 pounds, 252 if you're 155, and 210 if you're 125. Rowing machine is the best, obviously, because you move the entire body. A 30-minute workout, you can get up to between 255 to 449. For those who like walking, 30 minutes, only 107 calories. If you're a little heavier, 159. So it's not a lot. And so if you go home and you have a little snack, boom, there goes your calorie expenditure of that day. That's why it's so important for us to be mindful of what we're putting in our mouths, right? And this is why, a lot of in my clinic, people say, well, I've done everything, I eat so clean, and I'm not losing weight. It's just we got to scrutinize the things that we're eating. Last, I'm going to talk about myths in the metabolism in general. Some of the myths: thinner people have higher metabolism. That's not true.
So just before you go, Dr. Lee,
Yeah.
actually, do you mind if I put out this poll for these
Sure,
questions and then we
yeah.
answer them back? So just for you guys watching on here, I'm actually going to run these poll questions for you, and that way we can speak to it as well as we get going. So I have popped them on board there for you. So please jump on board. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. So thinner people have a higher metabolism, myth or fact? Eating small meals will boost metabolism, true or fact? Or myth or fact, sorry. Don't eat before bed, it will turn into fat. And then you can't control your metabolism, and I have a slow metabolism. So please, guys, jump on board and answer some of those questions. So as you are filling them out, I will actually have Dr. Lee go ahead and we'll speak over them as we go, because we're getting a few answers coming in now. Sure. I'm just wanting to at least try and get, before you feed into their ear, of what their true facts and myths are.
Yeah. So thinner people have higher metabolism. Obviously, that's false. Actually, that's a myth. Sorry. And so if you actually measure someone who is larger, they actually have a higher metabolism, right? They have more muscle mass typically, right? And so they would actually have more sort of higher resting metabolic rate or metabolism in general. Eating small meals will boost your metabolism. That's not true. Your metabolism is what it is. Basically, when you eat meals, the body will break it down as its natural process. Now, having said that, though, what you eat, the specific macronutrients, does play a role, but eating multiple small meals does not do that. If anything, eating small meals just makes you feel better because you're less bloated in general. And so it's still the same amount of calories. You still need to burn the same amount to get rid of it too as well. And don't eat before bed; it will turn to fat. That's not true. We define a whole days of worth of calorie, but it's basic entire process over several days or averages per se in the body. For example, the next day if you fast, that food will be gone, right? So you won't, that won't turn to fat per se. But you should not eat before bed anyways, because there's a lot of digestive issues that come along with it, reflux disease. There's a certain circadian rhythm to our body, and it needs time to rest too as well. But eating a meal before bed will not turn it straight into fat. The body will break it down. If you have a calorie deficit for the day, for example, you have a low protein for the day, it will conserve the protein for production of new protein material.
You
You
still
can't
burn energy when you sleep.
You still burn energy when you sleep. Absolutely. That's why we
Mhm.
call it the basal metabolic rate, right?
Mhm.
Um, you can't control your metabolism. That's not true as well. That's a myth. You can't control your metabolism in the sense that, you can manipulate it in a way where you build lean muscle mass, etc. You basically have more exercise and all that kind of stuff in the food you eat. So indirectly, but we don't have a pill or stuff that to change your metabolism. Although you take caffeine pills, it will just a temporary means, but indirectly you can affect your metabolism. So that's a kind of a more of a myth. Sorry. That's kind of in between there. Okay. And the last one, I have a slow metabolism, and that's not obviously that's a myth. It's false statements. Your metabolism is what it is, and basically it's determinant predominantly of your lean muscle mass. Overall, your calorie expenditure is based on your overall level of activity and the food we eat, right? And so because we're a creature of habits, our metabolism tends to be very constant over time too as well. Even though it decreases slowly over the year, it tends to be very consistent because of the activities we do, the things we do on a weekly basis. The amount of the food that we eat tends to not deviate a lot from like 5, 6 different meal choices typically. Okay, so hopefully that answers the some of the myths.
Can I add one more in there just as
Mm-hmm.
a little topic to speak about, and the topic of metabolic adaptations.
Yeah.
So the difference between somebody, so within our clinic, who is slowly adjusting their caloric threshold for the deficit versus somebody who jumps in and takes only a 500 caloric diet intake. What's happening in between those, the
Yeah.
energy
So
breakdown with these folks, and does it stabilize to a certain point?
so I used to do something called, when I first started learning about this, was something called VLCD, very low calorie diet. And so the diet is based on data um, for um, for medical management, certain conditions too as well. But it's and basically these individuals eat between 500 and 800 calories. And so what happens initially with such a low calorie deficit, it's a big shock to the system. Okay, so people tend to have a lot of side effects in the beginning. So typically is withdrawal from a lot of the refined carbohydrate foods, and that's the first thing. And so what happens is, because there's such a calorie deficit, the body goes into breaking down the fat, the carbohydrates, what we have left over, the glycogen store that we have in our liver and a muscle mass. And so what happens, you'll see a big rapid weight loss. And so, and simultaneously with the rapid weight loss, because you're breaking down glycogen in our muscle mass, you have a drop in muscle mass quite a bit. And along with the breakdown of glycogen, what you actually see is a lot of water weight loss. So one molecule of glycogen actually attracts 4 molecules of water. And that's why these individuals will have to drink a lot of fluid to maintain that, or else get a lot of kidney dysfunction and whatnot too as well, right? And so to answer your question about what happens after time, is there is actually a plateau or a balance of the body over 8 to 12 weeks actually of weight loss. So the amount of muscle breakdown tends to plateau at a steady state. It doesn't stop. If you continue eating let's say 500 calories, it doesn't stop. It plateaus. So there's a constant rate of that. And you would continue to have a constant rate obviously a fat breakdown, and if it's a low carbohydrate food you're eating, obviously that can affect more of fat breakdown. And so you still have the major processes of fat breakdown and protein breakdown, and because of the significant protein breakdown, that's why you have a big drop in basal metabolic rate. So I've measured people 6 weeks apart, and their basal metabolic rate can drop up to 30%, so which is quite phenomenal, right? So what's the difference if you're losing weight slowly? So the process of actually muscle breakdown decreases, right? So that the rate of muscle breakdown slows down. And so even though you're losing less weight, you're actually maintaining more muscle mass. And so that means in the long run, what happens is that you're at an advantage, right? Meaning that there's less rebound when you start to eat higher calorie foods, because really you cannot sustain yourself in 500 calories for the rest of your life, right? And so you tend to have more muscle mass, you tend to have more energy, you tend to be more active as well, and so all these stuff goes along with that too. And there's less loss of water weight simultaneously.
So
So in
I
order,
think,
yep,
sorry,
yep,
I think this is one of yours. Your body adjusts to what it's stressed to.
it is absolutely 100%, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, I've got one question here from one of our viewers here, which I've been waiting for this, so I'm happy they asked. I know some very inactive people that eat a lot of unhealthy foods and never gain any weight. I don't, I don't, and I gain weight easy. Why is that if a slow metabolism is a myth?
Yeah, so really it's the processing of the food, right? Remember, we still break down the food itself, right? But unfortunately, the gut flora or our GI system as well, that's where a lot of the absorption of food comes in. So that's why I say if you eat an apple, you might extract 80 calories. I eat an apple, I might extract 60 calories. So it seems like they're eating a lot of food, but not extracting entire calories too as well, right? Over time, this will catch up to them typically because as we get older, our metabolism starts to slow down too as well, right? And remember, when you're looking at someone, you're looking at them at one point in time too as well. So they might be eating a lot in front of you, but they may be fasting all day too as well, or not eating all day. So you have to really see what their true life pattern is like. And so a lot of people eat one meal, but eat a large meal, right? And it could be only 1,200 calories, because you get full, right? And they stop. And so for myself, if I'm very busy for the day, I tend to eat one large meal a day, which is probably not the best thing at nighttime because you get a lot of stomach problems and stuff like that. But it seems like I eat quite a lot. But my overall calorie deficit, so my overall calorie consumption is fairly normal, right, as well. And you got to look at what they do as well for work or what they do for a living, what the activities they do, right? A lot of times
What's their medical history?
what's the medical history?
Is
Yeah,
there insulin resistancy?
yeah.
Plays a big role on storage
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah. So there's lots of reasons why one can eat more food and not gain a lot of weight whatsoever. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions out there actually from the audience there that where we've covered there, or any of these, questions of why they and not me kind of moments that we can bust? Please go ahead and ask in. Yeah, Dr. Lee, I'm not sure if you have one more slide there or some more information, but I'll keep an eye on the questions here and I will do my usual
Yes.
interruption there.
Yeah, so this is just a summary slide of what I mentioned, just going through very quickly. Energy deficit required, in order to lose weight, we need to have an energy deficit. Just remember that fat is the most calorie dense food, followed by protein and carbohydrates. Lean muscle mass is best correlated to a basal metabolic rate. So if you want to increase metabolic rate here, you want to increase your lean muscle mass, right? So our basal metabolic will fluctuate through life and day to day as well, typically a little bit, based on the food we eat, etc., all that kind of stuff. And our BMR tends to decrease with age, unfortunately, making it harder to lose weight as we get older. And if you've done a lot of big weight loss over the years too as well, it might be a little harder to lose weight down the road. Additionally, you don't need to count calories, but you definitely should be aware of how dense calories are in terms of certain foods. That's very important. and there is really no such thing as a slow metabolism. Your metabolism is what it is based on your physiology, and so it can be manipulated to a degree. And keep in mind that there's lots of factors that go into extraction of food, which may look like it's part of metabolism per se, but that's just the process of catabolism. So the inability to lose weight suggests that there is a balance in terms of energy input and energy expenditure. And so we have to scrutinize, our energy expenditure, but more often is scrutinizing the energy input tend to be more effective.
So we've got another question in there. Does intermittent fasting help to lose weight more quickly? So I'm not sure if that's in regards to metabolism and the breakdown of energy in that time, but yeah, I'll open up.
Yep. So it really depends on the length of intermittent fasting, right? And what you're eating when you're not intermittent fasting. And so if you look at what happens is that you tend to eat less calories when you're fasting overall, and that often helps us lose weight, right? But when you're fasting in general, the body will need energy regardless, right? And so it will pull from your body. So if you had a lot of if you started off with a high carbohydrate food in the beginning, so the body will break down all the glycogen, they'll use all the glucose that you need, all the glucose that you eat when you're not fasting, and it'll utilize that. Simultaneously, it will still work on your fat, particularly eating a low carbohydrate food as well, right? And so then that's why we have a higher ketone production. And so not necessarily you will lose weight more quickly. And often for people, it allows a natural weight restriction. And so if you fast over time, meaning you do it over day in and day out, you get used to actually feeling that hunger sensation. And so you get used to the behavior that I don't always need food in my mouth too as well, or I need to eat constantly and to keep my energy up. And so the body will maintain itself and the body will adapt to the fasting as well. Okay.
Beautiful. Okay. I think that's our last question in there. One last shout out there if anybody else has a question to pop out. But in the meantime, if you're looking to have some more information on energy balance and metabolism, it's actually available in the September newsletter that we just posted not too long ago. So some interactive pieces in there. There's some information on energy breakdown, some how can we increase that energy mass itself and the breakdown. There's some recipes and things like that in there as well. So please reach out there or catch us on social media or ask your health coach if you're a part of our team here at How Clinics. Ask your coach some of those questions as well. But there is information out there in our social media that can help stem some of these questions and information as you're going along as well. Not just through the webinar as you get going. So I do recommend you find that. And we also have October's newsletter coming out mid next week, along with our webinar as we're coming up for next month. And sorry, I'm just going to look to the side here for a second because I'm always having to check on what the next webinar is. And we've got it, weight loss through personal development. So that's what we'll be discussing next month with Dr. Lee, the last Wednesday of the month. And that'll be the highlight of the newsletter as well for October, just to kind of stem that interest in how do you get weight loss through personal development itself. So we covered energy in, energy out kind of today, but we're going to talk about the mindset piece. That's a big portion of it as well as we get going. So there's no more questions there, Dr. Lee. I'm not sure if you had any other things that you wanted to add or.
I'm good.
Okay, guys. So we'll see you either in clinic, online, social media, via email, or through the phone. If you're not one of our patients, please give us a call, and we will chat to you guys later. And I hope you have a good evening and fuel up with some great energy for the night. Take care, guys.
Take
Bye.
care.